welcome. Thank you for coming, everyone. And we really wanted to make this intimate because this is a learning space, and even though it's a panel, I don't want you to think of it as everyone up here is an expert that has to relay knowledge and that you don't have something to offer to us, because actually all of us first and foremost are parents who came to this work because we sort of, I think, most of us fell into it once we saw what was happening to our children and to education in general. And so then we kind of became experts, around it, or brought maybe our professional expertise to the table. But so I think we all kind of just have woken up and found ourselves actually doing TV interviews and being quoted in newspapers and being in rallies and going to things, and we're like, how did that happen? But it's just we want to help get the word out. So I'm just going to introduce everyone on the panel, and then I have a couple of slides to guide the conversation, but because we're such a small group, we have a lot of space for you to kind of just ask questions about things that are important to you. So feel free to, raise your hand, or if there's only a few, you can jump in. So I'm going to, in no particular order actually, I'm going to start with Monique, who's sitting right here. We have our name cards, which are flattened. Monique's an early childhood math teacher in the Bronx, teaching children from kindergarten through second grade. She's also the mom to 2 young children, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, whose birthday is today. Can we Mom of the Year award for coming here instead of her birthday? Yeah, no. The irony of this work is that when your kid is doing this massive opt-out on, the first day of testing, you're so busy doing work that you can't even find out how that opt-out day went. So, birthday, like you said, she's one. She won't remember. When her son started kindergarten this year, he took one of the city's standardized bubble tests as a measure of student learning, also called MOSL. We have all these acronyms. And after organizing with other parents, the measure was changed. Monique got her master's in early childhood education from CCNY. It's happening right now as we speak. So thank you for being here. And just to point out that the test that her 5-year-old took in kindergarten was given to her child without Monique's knowledge or consent. She found out after the fact. Joanna Perez, right here next to me, is a parent to a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, and a kindergartner at Brooklyn New School, which is PS 146. While she's always been involved with her children's education, this year she became an activist. Because she has seen the negative impacts and consequences of high-stakes testing, particularly on the most vulnerable of our children, she's been raising awareness among families about the actions they can take to stand up for high-quality schools for all children. She has chosen to opt her children out of the New York State ELA and math exams, and is very open to sharing her knowledge and experiences with other families who lack access to accurate information and who may run into challenges as they navigate the system. Lindsay Portnoy over there, Portnoy, is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Ed Foundations at Hunter College, the City University of New York. She received her PhD in educational psychology from Fordham University and was previously an early childhood classroom teacher. She currently works with teacher candidates at Hunter, teaching courses on assessment for teaching and learning from birth through adolescence. And she also teaches courses in early childhood ed and child and adolescent development. Her research focuses on question asking, knowledge acquisition across domains and developmental levels, and beliefs about knowledge. I think all come into play when we think about assessment, right? The next to Lindsay, closer to me, is Josmar, who's a trainer, a writer, a father of 2 young boys, ages 6 and 9. He was formerly the co-president of Peninsula Prep, the PTA, right? The PTA?
PTO.
Of Peninsula Prep in Far Rockaway, where he helped to stop the school from being closed. And then last but not least, we have Dow Tran, all the way on the end. Born in Vietnam and based in the South Bronx, Dow is an editor and community oral historian working on the Teacher Oral History Project and a domestic worker oral history project as well. She co-edited 101 Changemakers, Rebels and Radicals Who Changed U.S. History, and is a board member of Voices of a People's History, and she's also the co-chair of the Castle Bridge School, PTA, which is a school in Washington Heights that did something historic. Can you tell everybody? Can you just tell people what
Sure.
you did?
We opted out as a school from the MOSL that Monique's son had to take. So we were one of the schools, one of the 32 that was supposed to give it. And we had over 95% opt out, so then we couldn't give it. In general, I think most people in the room are probably familiar with the state tests that are given to third grade and through eighth grade. So I'm not going to talk about those. But in terms of the ones that are being given to kindergartners through second graders, it is really hard to find out, actually, what they are because no one will tell us. So our experience in New York City, in particular, they had never given tests of these sorts. No high stakes, no standardized, no bubble tests to little ones. And this was the first year that it got introduced. So on that sense, this was something that only came into place because of the, I don't know what you want to call it, the impasse that the teachers, the UFT had with the state. And what happened was that they couldn't figure out what part of local scoring for teachers' evaluations, what they would use for that. And then the state stepped in. John King wrote part of the contract that they ended up using, which stipulated that these tests would be what would be used. And so it's very confusing. I don't actually understand all of it because no one ever told us. But basically, we got word from our principal that this was the plan, that they were going to be tested twice, once in the fall as a baseline assessment and then once in the spring to see if the teachers added value to their students, and that would be some part of their score, and that would determine how quote-unquote effective the teachers were. So that's the basic sense. I know that in other states there's a whole alphabet soup. So this is something that I think for a long time was unacceptable. People did not think about testing kindergartners through second graders, at least not with these kinds of tests. I think people used, you could talk more about this too, right, Lindsay? But diagnostic tests, teachers do kind of assessments with their children every day and don't need tests that are written by outside companies in particular. These were all written by Pearson and the like. So I know in Chicago there was literally an alphabet soup of these kinds of tests that were being given. And I mean, in some ways, if you contrast New York State with other states, we have it kind of good, which is horrible to say.
Really?
Because in other states, I know that my friend who has a child in Chicago, she has a kindergartner who took 5 tests this year. So it's not, it's no longer off limits. It's no longer off limits, and that's, I think, part of the incursion of this kind of sense of high stakes testing. It's coming on us whether we like it or not. And so most of us did not know that this was happening, and still many people don't know that it's happening. And so in the city, the reason why that there were 32 schools, I think, that were singled out was because they didn't have the older testing grades. So these are all new schools. They only had kindergartners through second graders, and there were only 32 of them. So I believe it was kind of like trying to get in the door and trying to say that it was okay to do this. And luckily, I think some of us found out about it, and we actually, it's not totally clear, but it doesn't seem like they're forcing schools to do this. Some schools did it anyway, such as where Monique's child went. Some schools think that they have to do it and are going to do it or have done it for the spring, and some schools didn't. So it's not clear. I don't think the DOE has been clear about saying now what the repercussions are. I don't know what they're going to use for the teacher evaluations, but I will say that at our school, we had many conversations with the teachers, and while they themselves were not always comfortable speaking publicly, they were very against these tests. I spoke at length with my child's teacher, who was basically in tears, thinking that she would have to give this test to the kids. And we have a population at our school, which I just want to highlight. This test is given in English, even the math tests. And I do have, if people want to look at it later, this gives you an idea of the student booklet part, so you can see what the test is. And it's actual bubbles, and it's actual questions that are very abstract and totally developmentally inappropriate. I'm not an educator, but I could tell that it didn't make sense. And the reason that I could tell is because I think one of the first things you learn if you work with kids is that there's always a range, right? So you can look at something like walking. There's always a range. Some kids do it at 9 months, some kids do it at 15. One is not better than the other. It's different. And if you put a benchmark and say, you must hit this at 9 months, it's kind of like, I don't know, feeding meat to somebody who doesn't eat meat or is not ready yet to process it. It's not helpful, and it actually could be harmful. So I think that's kind of what we were getting. Or I read something where people said, we don't teach toddlers to walk by pushing them down the stairs, right? Which I kind of feel like these tests, that's what they're doing. They're saying, you know, learn, or learn to swim by throwing kids into the water. There's things that you can do to make that a more, you know, appropriate and pleasant experience, and that's some of what we were trying to get at, is that not only were the actual tests really destructive, but they were also taking things away. So the thing that I was trying to point out earlier is the population at our school has a lot of emergent bilinguals. Kids for whom English is not a first language, it's not spoken at home, so the test is given in English. And you can have the question repeated many times, but it's not really going to help you understand or answer correctly if you don't understand the question. English. Yeah. So for us, that was a huge issue. And then, you know, with children with special needs or learning challenges and disabilities, they actually get double time, is the understanding. And so to me that just makes no sense, because it's just more time to, and if you think about it, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, they're not the greatest necessarily about sitting still and being told, you know, here's the test, listen to the question, well, you know, bubble in. You say color in the bubbles, they're like, where are the crayons, you know? So for us, it was a whole number of issues coming together, and it's really, to me, it feels like if they're going to start testing kids at this early an age, where are they going to stop? I mean, and the justification behind it being that they're supposed to get ready for college and for careers, and for me, at least, I'm sure most of you agree, that makes no sense.
Well, I have a question. So, because I didn't make this statement at the beginning, but I think many of you work in independent schools, or we're in an independent school right here. So, kindergarten through 3rd grade, this is not actually something that affects the children that you work with. Do you think your kids are getting college and career ready?
Absolutely.
So clearly that's bullshit, right? We know that. So let's move on from that. That's on tape too. Yeah, right. So we know what's happening here. The people who graduate from independent schools without these standardized tests are doing exceptionally well in our country, right? So that's interesting and wrong. So thank you so much. And I guess the takeaway that I get from that is we're not even so sure about what those assessments are, tests, high-stakes tests that are being given to the younger children. So it's up to parents to really start investigating and asking questions and agitating to find out, right, and what their rights are as parents. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're trying to just sort of, this works out nicely. So Lindsay, what do valid, reliable assessments for K through 3 look like? Or what are high stakes tests? We just got a little bit of a conversation, so take it away.
So I first have to say that I feel like a terrible mother, because on my bio I put nothing about my children. I do have kids. We are in the public schools. We were talking earlier about, and I think that that's something that I'm glad that you brought up, is that we're a small group because it is an independent school. And this issue really is an issue for all of our children, especially in the public schools. And I think assessment is, I teach assessment, and I very strongly believe in assessment. And I think that all teachers use assessment, and quite well, not the assessment that you showed. So thank you. And I always start with quotes, and I don't remember exactly, but it's something to the effect of every child can learn, just not on the same day and not in the same way. And that's my philosophy of assessment, is that the high stakes tests that we're seeing now, these developmentally inappropriate tests that are asking children to abstract, when, if you remember from Piaget back in the day, they don't even get to until, much later in elementary school, are just not appropriate or valid or reliable instruments to assess whether or not the child understands a concept. And I have a laundry list of assessment terms if anyone's interested or if you want to hear. But I think what's important is that we all have a shared language to communicate about assessment. And so like the terms reliability and validity, a valid assessment is one that assesses, the content that is of importance and relevant to the child and to classroom instruction. And the distinction between the high stakes testing that we're seeing and the testing that's going on in the independent schools is that in the independent schools, these valid assessments represent the teacher-created curriculum that is developmentally appropriate and emergent from the children in the classroom. Whereas these high-stakes testing are oftentimes arbitrary assessments with a tremendous amount of what we would call psychometrically as error, because of, right, that's a lovely way of saying the child doesn't have, English is not the first language, why are you going to batter the child with an assessment in English, right? There's a tremendous amount of error anyway, and as an early childhood person, like we all are, we know that the reliability, so validity is whether the assessment measures what it's intended to measure, and reliability is does it do so over a period of time and across a variety of individuals, right? And so where is the reliability in these instruments, right? Well, then we get into the conversation of we're not able to see the tests, and we're not able to see specifically what was wrong with the test. So therefore, we're not able to really say if they're reliable or not. We have to speculate based on the results of our children and the tears that they come home, sharing with us, which I've seen. And so, I don't know how much you want me. I mean, I could just talk forever, which is a problem. But I think that in the land of high-stakes testing, we're focusing on product and we're not focusing on process. We're focusing on discrete pieces of knowledge as opposed to the big picture. How does this child develop cognitively, physically, social, emotionally? Sure, there are content areas, but we don't have to teach rote instruction of how to do the letter R. You can use Play-Doh to create shapes, and when the child makes a gentle curve, guide them in the direction of, oh, what does that remind you of? Right? And guide them intuitively to learning the things that we know they need to know to be college and career ready, which they are without the use of these high-stakes tests. So
Good. So I think once everyone says a little bit, we'll be able to kind of be more conversational as well. So I think I have questions.
So I'll just keep it.
Thank you. So I think what I had, sorry, I forgot this is working. Oh, this was an example of a math assessment that was given to children. I think Dow had sent it to me. And it's kind of hard to see, but essentially the children have to listen to the teacher say, point to the ear, count, these are for 5-year-olds, count the numbers as I read them, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. What is the next number? Find the next number. So you can see that they're pointing, on the bottom is what the children would be looking at. These are for 5-year-olds. And this is part 4, well, right,
Because
it's
of the year.
4 and they turn 5, yeah, in kindergarten. I guess it could be 4 or 5, yeah.
Mine was 4 when you took this test.
So this is the measure of student learning. So the children are expected to do this, and their growth from fall to spring, if I'm correct, is what the teacher's job rating, their evaluation is based on how well the children grow from us. So there's no value for the children at all. So this is, my kid would have failed. My kid wouldn't be able to read it.
You don't need.
Yeah, rightly so, right?
Not until second
So-
They're emergent reading until
They-
7.
Yeah. Even if you just look at visually how the objects are so close together in the boxes, like for my boy, who has some visual organizational stuff going on, this would have been very difficult for him to process. So we'll make sure we pass around the copy that you have down. So what about children with IEPs and learning styles? I know that we've referenced that a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit more, Monique, about
I mean, I won't repeat what was said earlier, but just to say that if we know that these high-stakes bubble tests are not good indications of learning for all children, then that it becomes even more of an issue when you're talking about children with different learning needs. And I get really angry when I think about this because I'm an early childhood math teacher. I work with kids from kindergarten through 2nd grade who need extra support and extra experiences with math. And what happens when children take these kinds of tests and they fail them, or as I would say, are set up to fail them? What it does from a very young age is it sort of instills this understanding in children that it doesn't really matter how much you've grown within what is right for you, but there are other people who are going to tell you your whole life that you're not enough and that you can't like measure up, you can't add up, you're not good enough. And for some of the children that I work with, that being told that from such a young age is incredibly damaging to the lives of children. It doesn't even matter where they've come from or how much they have grown. They're always at the bottom. They're always sorted and labeled, and that's just how it goes. And I think that really gets to the heart of what these standardized tests are, what they were made for. And the education deformers, they talk about, they try to put themselves in the tradition of social justice sometimes. They say we expect high things from all children, and so on. By the way, real social justice educators have always known that all children have unlimited potential, right? But it's kind of a hard pill to swallow when it comes from the people who are actually destroying public education and telling through these kinds of measures and through these kinds of tests that children with special needs will always just be on the bottom. And if you actually look into that in a more sort of like in-depth way, that's a really reactionary idea about people that like the movement for rights for people with disabilities and so on challenged many years ago, and we shouldn't still be in this place where people who learn differently are told that they're worthless. And it's actually, it gets to the heart of these tests, which were actually created, in sort of the wake of the eugenics, the racist eugenics movement. And so what is the impact of these tests on children with special needs, children with IEPs, children with learning disabilities, however you want to discuss it, is that from a young age it sends them the message that it doesn't matter how much you try, it doesn't matter how much you grow, the people in charge will always think of you as second class. And all of us who got involved in education did it for very different reasons, because we see that, I'm sure I don't speak for myself when I say we got involved in education because we see the potential of all children and the way that they show the potential for a different kind of society that isn't marred by all the inequalities and the sexisms and the racisms of our society. And these people who say that they're working in the interest of social justice, it's really hollow when they're the ones that are actually continuing to sort and label and stigmatize and categorize and essentially set, their college and career ready is get ready for what we've got in store for you. Be okay with your lot in life. Be okay with being told that you will do this and, stay where you're told to stay. Our idea of, readiness for life and social justice is a very different one, and I think it should be one that values the potential of all children. And these tests are just the tip of the iceberg, but they're the sort of tool right now that's being used to say, buck up, because this is what you're going to get from now on. And I think that's what we have to stand up against.
So when we think about different learning styles, right? So everyone in the room, like kind of just the three major ways of learning: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, like way back early childhood 101, right? But this, like doing these tests, a 5-year-old bubbling in, a piece of paper and listening to a teacher talk is hitting how many of those learning styles? Like none, really. I mean, you could say visual, but not really. Auditory, not really, because there's no personal connection to them. So even if you're a child that doesn't have an IEP or is sort of typically developing, it's an extremely narrow way to try to understand what a 4 or a 5 or a 6-year-old knows, what they've been learning in school.
Now hands-on means hands-on pencil and paper.
Yes. That's unfortunate. Josmar is going to talk a little bit about the impact on low-income children and or children of color.
Hi, so I'm not an educator, so
Okay.
I'm sure there's people on here that can really articulate some of the other points a lot better than I. But I will say that my point of view is one as a parent who didn't really know a lot about education. I got custody of my kids, and I just kind of like became a parent, that kind of just, you know, on the fly and was learning things. And I got involved by joining the PTO of my oldest son's school. During the year that I was serving on the board, our school was slated for closure by the prior mayor's, one of the prior mayor's crusades against closing schools, predominantly in low-income communities of color, those kind of schools. And we fought back, and as we fought against it, I kind of like immersed myself a little bit into what was really going on in education, and I realized that testing was driving a lot of the closures. Our school was, pointed at and said like, you guys aren't producing enough, right? So this whole, business efficient, market-oriented point of view that says like schools and children are like, are widgets or something to be evaluated, measured, and put a microscope on. I started to dawn on me. I was like, this is going to be more than just the closing of the school. This has to be a battle where we talk about like what is at the core of education. What are we doing in education? So I started becoming aware of like high stakes testing and what it meant and what it was doing. My son opted out last year he was third grade. It was his first state test year, and I didn't really even understand some of the finer points here, but I knew that it was wrong, and I knew that he like as the saying goes, he's more than a data point. So we opted out last year. We recently moved into East Harlem, into another school that was predominantly Black and Latino students, and we also opted out. But in both times, we were the only ones to do it. So he was the only one actually in the district to do it. So even as like the opting out movement has grown, I realized I was like, well, we need to be able to spread these sentiments and these ideas a lot to children in communities of color, because these are the children that are going to be affected by it most. These are the ones who are going to say like, you're not doing well, so your school is going to close. And I think a lot of it, even as the opting out movement has made great inroads, I think in like progressive and affluent parents, I think that a lot of work is left to be done in communities of color, because I think in communities of color, one of the reasons I think some people in communities of color, as I've reached out to parents and said like, what do you think about testing? Is this kind of right? Because I think there's, for some people, a kind of like a politics of responsibility at play. People feel like they have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Just like, get your stuff together. And this was a sentiment I got from a lot of parents. And this is cultural too. It's just something. My mother, who immigrated from Colombia, she had it a little bit. She just had to work, and she just like no excuses. Like you can't make excuses in a country that doesn't give you with any leeway. But also in African American communities, there's a strain of responsibility policy. Like it doesn't matter that there's structural and institutional racism. You have to be able to pull yourself up out of it. So this sometimes is at play, and this goes right in line with kind of like a zero tolerance approach to education. So when a teacher says like, let's make them better. You don't want what's best for your son. We gotta just like force them to be better and college ready. Some of the parents, can get behind that, and unless we kind of counter that argument, it's gonna be a tough road. So and also just to go back to what Monique was talking about the IEPs. A lot of IEPs are in communities of color as well. So there's also an issue with children in communities of color who have, I don't know the statistics, but I dare venture to say that they have higher numbers of ADD, ADHD, yes. Whatever those, if those things exist. I guess my son has ADHD, although I've read things that say like, I don't regardless of what the conversation about ADHD is, he has a hard time paying attention. That's how I'll leave it. And so he's a child. And so either way, I've noticed in these schools that the kids who were coming in with all sorts of baggage from a myriad of sociological reasons, they're like really gonna hit the wall when it comes to this testing movement. So it doesn't work well with them, and I think in some cases, I think parents have to be able to the kids can't figure out the politics or the cultural reasons behind it, but we can figure it out, and we can go to the schools and we can say to the principals and say like Dow did, how can we get involved in this for the sake of our children? So that's all I'll say for now.
I think one of the things that you're talking about, the school closings linked to low test scores. So if you just play that out, if a school's having low test scores and it's predominantly a school, low-income community or mostly children of color, the reaction of the administration, what do you think is going to be the reaction in terms of like curricular approaches? Like you can talk. So like if you have low test scores and for 1 year, how is the administration and teachers going to react?
Teach to the
Teach
test.
to the test,
Get those
narrow
scores
the
up.
curriculum, go lower and lower. Our third grade test scores were bad, so what's happening in second grade? What do you mean you're taking your kids on a trip? What do you mean you're having group work, cooperative learning, independent work? No, but wait a minute, but second grade, that's too late. First grade, what are you doing? How much time on task for reading? Here's the script, right? Kindergarten, no, throw out the sand table. I have a friend who teaches kindergarten who cried. She begged them, don't throw out my water table, please. She said she got there, gone. She has desks in rows, and they have computers for kindergarten so they can practice they do their tests on the computer. So you have to play this out like we're all connected. It doesn't matter where you teach or where your kids are. Everybody's going into the same society. So we have to really think about this as a global issue that we need to stand up for. So thank you. So English language learners, and we've all kind of referred a little bit, so do you want to add something?
Yes, I can. So where does the English language learner usually live? They're going to live most likely in the lower income communities, and we've already talked about how the lower income communities do receive less funding, and their test scores determine monetary rewards and closure of schools. And so when the schools have to teach to the test, when schools and teachers are being held accountable for how children perform on the high-stakes tests, then you have more time concentrated on teaching to the test and less time learning and funds being taken away from performance. And when a school has low performance, it results in less resources to help children. When you are teaching to the test, which unfortunately has become more prevalent in schools over the years, you take out time from programs that are designed to help the English language learner become proficient in their second language. And just to give some statistics, roughly right now there are about 160,000 ELL students. Of that, 35,000 ELL students have an IEP. In New York City, there are over 180 languages spoken in the homes. So it's also quite interesting to know that the Department of Ed recognizes that it takes about 5 to 7 years to become academically proficient in a second language. And research says, and I quote Cummins in 1992 said, developing literacy in students' first language helps them develop literacy in their second language because core knowledge developed in the first language transfers. So the question at large is, why is it that ELL students are held at the same standards as high-stakes testers amongst their peers that speak English, basically? It's unfair, and also it's one thing to note, Jocelyn also made a point saying that culture plays a big role in the ELL communities. It is known that if a parent parents feel that the school is there to educate in a lot of lower income communities, since most likely they are either not educated, and if they are educated in their native language, how do they help their child learn the second language? I believe that the Department of Ed should implement more dual language programs. There needs to be restructuring to educate not only the English language student, but also parents as well. If you start with the home, you will see wonders in the English language students' performance. So, yeah, and I mean, I guess I would just like to say that as a parent to the parent, we are our child's first teacher and an advocate. And there's lots of organizations out there that are making a difference in children, but it's our job as well to teach our children, because if not, we are leading them in that direction to fail. So become educated in your rights as parents, join organizations, speak to other parents who have obtained information.
Thank you. So, I put this up, and it's not actually, I think we can all sort of think about what this means. Like, if we have standardized testing continue at the rate that it's happening, and in the format that they're currently in, we can predict for our future, our educational future, that it's probably not going to be very bright. And so with that, I thought we've talked a lot, and so I want to actually give you all a chance to ask questions, make comments, and then sort of see where the last 15 minutes will go. And I was sort of thinking along the lines of, what can we do to change our trend? Brian Jones was supposed to be on this panel, but he apparently has the flu. But I did say that I would let you all know to put a plug that he's on the Lieutenant Governor, he's on the Green Party ballot, and Howie Hawkins for governor. I mean, I'm being political, but Cuomo has done a lot of this stuff to us and our children. So, yeah, so I would vote for anybody, not Cuomo. But Howie Hawkins seems great, and so just want to tell you that. So I'm still learning, but it's like, at this point, what can you not do? And Cuomo has really put forward a lot of these policies, unfortunately. And so any questions, comments?
Can a parent, even if the school is testing and everybody in Johnny's class is taking this test, parent A could say, well, my child's not taking it. Is that how it works?
Mm-hmm. As a parent, you have a civil right to refuse testing for your child. So you have the right to do that. You can say, my child will not take this test.
From K through 3.
Any age. And because it's K through 3, this stuff that we're talking about, but then there's the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and then there's a 7th grade, a 10th grade, so regions, there's a lot of testing that happens. So you can do that. Some schools, I think, did, which Castle Bridge, they made that decision, but you as a parent have rights over your child, and so you are allowed to, it's not allowed, you can take that right, you can exercise it. And we've all done it in different ways at different places, and I should acknowledge that Anna Allenbrook over here is the principal of PS 146, Brooklyn New School, where Johanna and our children go, and we participated in the opt-out, and it was very easy to do at BNS because the teachers were supportive and the administration was supportive, and so we ended up having a very high opt-out rate. So the second thing is that there's safety in numbers in a sense, so the more people, if you get another parent and they get another parent and then you end up having a critical mass, you have a stronger voice, and then the administration, you can tend to feel a little bit less pressured. And then thirdly, there's a lot of literature that I brought here that you can take copies of. There's an organization called Change the Stakes that is giving a lot of information, a lot of support. There are many organizations doing this work, but Change the Stakes is sort of like the place where we all kind of seem to keep landing. And so you feel free to take all this, and there's information, 12 reasons to opt out. There's a sample opt-out letter. We have literature in English and Spanish, lots of information. So you're welcome to take that, and we can continue, supporting you. And we want to actually, there's a sign-in sheet. So if you want to sign, it's right there. Thanks. Yes.
I have a question. Can someone speak on, because I'm a little unsure about this, what stakes the tests have on the actual children? Like, what gets done with that score?
Yeah.
I think that just generally high stakes, the reason why they are high stakes is because it's a single administration of an assessment that's then determining placement or promotion, right? So a lot of the fear for people not wanting to opt out, understandably, in 4th grade is because in that 5th grade year when they're applying to their middle school, that score is going to be used for placement. Also children who may be, in flux in the general school year might need that score to then say, okay, this child can be promoted to 4th grade. And that's where the repercussions we were talking about might also.
So those are the stakes even for the kindergarten ones. No,
They're
that's
different.
what I was-
Those are different tests.
Those are for the
Those
those
are
are stakes
teacher
for the
assessments.
teachers because I mean it gets really complicated, which is like
They're high stakes.
part of the issue is so complicated that at a certain point we're all busy and exhausted. I think kind of like check out and say, well, I just hope the school's doing the best by me, right? But yeah, there's stakes for the teachers, and those are really bizarre when you really hear them because it's based on how the children grow from fall to spring. And that's for third grade as well, the ELA and the math. But just imagine, like today, if I took a test, it would be a horrible day and I would bomb. But on another day, when I had, more sleep and less stress, I would probably do well. How can you have it be that one day be the thing that determines? And then there's a weighting of the scores for teachers. So there's a supervisory evaluation that is supposed to be 60% of, right? Am I right? Am I getting this right?
Very hard to explain.
Well, but basically, 40% is supposed to be the children's growth and 60% is supposed to be the supervisor kind of evaluation.
grow
But
at all.
if the children don't grow well, the 40% becomes heavier than the 60. You could have great supervisor evaluations, and if the children's scores don't grow, that it weighs more than your supervisor saying that you've been doing a great job. So it can impact a teacher's job. So there are high stakes for teachers and children. Sorry.
So do you guys propose an alternative as to how the children will be evaluated? And if so, what would that
Yeah,
alternative
definitely. Do you want to take?
I mean, that math assessment that you put up there, I don't know if people want to look at it for a sec. So my son took this measure of student learning when he started kindergarten and he was 4 years old. This question here is asking, I don't remember exactly, but it's like identify which number, which image shows a certain number of frogs or whatever. And
Which one shows 13?
which one shows 13? And I can tell you as a math teacher, being able to count 13 images on a page tells you much less about a child mathematically and their counting skills, as sure as many of the early childhood educators in the room know, than actually presenting them with the objects and watching their behaviors as they count. Do they line them up? Are they totally disorganized and are they touching everything and going all over the place and don't have the one-to-one correspondence? So all that is to say that, yes, we have much better ways to measure children counting, for example, than this, because it's something that
We've
people
been doing it
for a really long time.
But somehow it's not okay for some, right? Like politics and money, because we haven't talked about money at all. But
Yeah.
$32 million to Pearson Education for the test that you can't see. More than that, actually. So yeah, you mentioned, Lindsay had mentioned like that when teachers create tests that are based on the material that they're teaching, then you have information, then you know whether or not the children learn. Let me just show you. Okay, I'm sorry. So this is like my vision for the future, and
That's your vision for the future?
so plain. So but I'm getting to the assessment part. So that's my child when he was little. This is Dow's daughter observing, documenting, exploring, creating. You can learn a lot about what children know when you look at their play. And when you ask them questions and ask them to explain, you get a lot of information. Asking them to point out what's 13 frogs just tells you not very much. But I'm sure Dow's daughter could tell you what was happening, who was there, what the roles were, what materials she used, why she arranged them the way that she did, if there were levels, all the vocabulary that she knows associated with houses. She knows probably circles and triangles and squares and rectangles from forming. Those are magnet tiles. So, right, did she do some cutting, some placing? You can look at her fine motor skills. You can look at her planning, coordination, all of that. But think about executive functioning. Think about, right? So children need to be playing, exploring, working together. This is a predominantly dual language class and some ELL, English language learning children in a low-income community. That's Dan Zanes. He was at the school. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting to this. So, in third grade at Brooklyn New School, children study China. And so they do a share about what they've learned about China. So all of the work that you see in some of these pictures children created all of this information, and then they stand as like docents at a museum, and they talk about everything they've done. They show you all their writing, and it's covering social studies and science and math and culture and your art. So all the different things that they're doing. This is an art project that actually happened over the summer, but it could have happened during the year. You know, working together, like these are all important skills for life that we don't see during tests. But I just wanted to kind of point about, like, when you're looking at what do children know, we know a lot about what children know. And it's fair to ask children to demonstrate what they know if they've learned something. It's not fair to put something in front of them that they've never seen before and say, well, you don't know it, so your teacher's not a good teacher, and you're kind of a dumb kid that's on the bottom. That's like ridiculous, and we should never accept anything like that. One of the pages that's in the math thing, I said it was having a parent kind of measure a child on the wall and say, like, you know, so what is this picture showing? And it's like math, how tall he is, how heavy he is,
how old he is.
And all I could think of, the kids that I work with in low-income neighborhoods in Brownsville would say, why is he writing on the wall? He's gonna get in trouble. Like, I wouldn't, like, nobody does that in my community. We don't write on the wall to measure people, right? So there's like a cultural disconnect, inappropriateness, lack of experience that children are sitting in front of these tests. And so what you're getting if they do poorly is that, you know, they're inappropriate tests, not that they don't know information or that they're not smart or ready to succeed. Yeah.
I was going to just, I wanted to also say for like people who think it's just like one test or it's just like one day or 1 week of test, that testing is really a culture too. So like it kind of like engulfs everything. An example is my kindergarten teacher. My older son luckily had teachers who, he opted out in 3rd and 4th grades. He had teachers who said like, yeah, you know, I agree with you on Common Core and all this stuff. Matter of fact, my son's in a private school to avoid all this business. So like some of the teachers and even some of the principals will tell you privately the things that, you know, the kind of things that we're saying here. But with my kindergartner this year, for the first time, I got some pushback, not from the DOE or from the principal, but from the teacher herself, a Latina woman who was keeping my son in from recess when he wouldn't finish his Common Core worksheet, which is basically a test prep worksheet.
The Go Math.
Right. So these are like sheets like that with bubbling, basically getting them ready to be good test takers for the next, you know, for the rest of their educational lives. And so I went there and I said, you don't think this is detention? And she's like, no, we're just having him make up the homework that he couldn't do last night because, you know, I wasn't there to help him or he forgot or whatever. And I was like, you're giving them attention. Like, it's just another way of saying detention. So you're being punitive in your approach at kindergarten now. So it's like a punitive mentality that they inflict on them. So of course, the Black and Latino kids have like this, we can't do that, that's against rules, because they're learning from early on that they're going to be punished, that there's like, so there's not like positive reinforcement, which we all know as parents usually works better than just like, you know, throwing the kitchen sink at them. But we have it going on in school. So this teacher and I, we butted heads. I had to go to the principal and I said, like, this is inappropriate. I mean, high school or some other stuff, you want to talk about it, but like 5th grade, 5-year-olds, it was absolutely, and you know, and I just thought about it and I said, this goes back into this kind of zero tolerance approach that we see in education, in policing, in a whole aspect of ways that our children experience this. And then, you know, and then sometimes the words and the statistics and everything can convince you. But the week of the test that they were giving these tests, I remember I was walking out and I was just like, man, I wish there was more people out there. And I was just walking out and I was just thinking about testing. And as I was walking to my car from the school, after I dropped off my boys, there's a park near on First Avenue, and I saw it. I looked over it, and it was a private school, and they had their kids there playing soccer during the week where everyone's in there cramming for tests at the public school, which is predominantly Black and immigrant children. And I look and see this private school, and the private school children are doing quite well.
Yes.
So like it's like the kind of like obsessive zero tolerance testing culture. It's not just the test; it's the test consumes the whole everything. Isn't necessary. And I looked and I said, these kids are playing soccer on a beautiful day. When my kids are in there, my son opted out at least, so they kept them in a room, you know, like to make sure he didn't contaminate everybody else with his zany. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was just the difference, and it was like a private school, so it's affluent, it's predominantly white. So there's these racial differences as well, and that just stuck on me. That to me, just seeing that visually told me everything that I needed to know,
Yeah.
more than
Yeah.
anything else I had read.
And another piece too, though, during the testing days for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, in many schools, they want it quiet, silent in the building, and they use the rooms to administer the test to, like, say, kids with IP who get double time, so they could sit there for 3 hours in front of the test. So everyone I know who teaches kindergarten to 2nd grade this year, they went on trips. They were forced to. They were like, oh, Botanic Gardens today. Then there was going to be a rainy day. One day there was going to rain torrentially. And I know people whose kids were out in the rain. They could not be in the building because it was testing time. So they needed silence. And so there's another impact, you know? Can you imagine?
It's like you don't need to be an expert in child development or anything to look at what's happening in the public schools in the city and know that it's wrong. I mean, you have, to add on to what you're describing, it's like from a young age, like children are like, oh, what reading level are you?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's
I'm
like
a
competition. I read, I'm a F
Low,
or a
high,
G or
yeah.
whatever. And it's like that comparison and the feelings that the kids have that aren't early readers, you know, or the stress that's associated with reading from such an early age. Like, how toxic is that, you know? I mean, or that, you know, getting held in from recess, very kids who need recess the most, you know, and then you add that to the stress that the teachers face from being measured in these ways, and then never mind the parents who have 2-3 jobs and are expected to help their kid with math homework that looks like another language, you know, so it's just, you know, it's a pressure cooker, and it's up to us to start to show and build the alliances and the like conversations that need to happen, and they're not always easy in order to.
Can I just add one
Yes,
thing?
yes.
Is that a friend of mine actually wrote about that too, about the culture of competition that we breed amongst our children. And one, like for example, with kindergartners, that she wrote an example about kindergartners who were taking these tests and they were forced to take the test and they couldn't help each other, but they wanted to help each other. So like instead of breeding community or collaboration, and it's like it's instinctual in a young child, like they want to share, they want to help, you know, like it's already innate. We're taking that out of them. We're saying no, we're competitive, we're individualized, we're atomized, and this is how society is going to be. So it's like it's not just formative for their education, it's formative for their politics, it's formative for a myriad of different things.
Wow. If you, we can send that around to everybody if you send the link.
Yeah, I'll get you.
Was there someone in the back who had their, oh, sorry, yes.
So my work is primarily with homeless children and families, and so my preference would be that our homeless families opt out, primarily because when they move from shelter to shelter, the kids miss so many days that even this test prep stuff, that would make no difference for them. And almost all of them will make sure that their kids somehow get to school on test day, but they can't get to school any other day because, again, they're moving from shelter to shelter, and schools don't offer the support that is federally supposed to be there, right? Like there's federal legislation that covers kids living in a state of homelessness, and we've got over 22,000 kids sleeping in shelters per night, and over 50% are early childhood kids. So one of the conversations that I have with parents around high-stake testing is really to explain, you know, like what's happening and what are their options. But I'm not a parent. So my work and what I think my work is really just connecting parents. And I would love to hear from the parents in the room, how do you have these conversations? What makes you step out of your zone and talk to other parents about opting out, and what does that mean? And then also just like explaining, right, like our kids and Black and brown kids are specifically being socialized to consistently stay in poverty, right? That's like what education is supposed to do. So it makes sense that testing is the way that it is, that it exists in the schools that it exists, that the homeless children that I work with will never see a school like this, right? And so it's by design, right? None of this is a surprise. And if you do anti-racist and anti-oppressive work and like really talk about what does it mean to accept diversity and include it, then the conversation really is like, how can parents partner up? And so I would love to hear from the parents, like, how do you partner up? How do you reach out? And how do you do it in an anti-racist way?
Well, I can say something. I thought about opting out a little bit last year, but I didn't. This year, obviously, I did opt out. And I started speaking to my family. I started speaking to my friends. when I spoke to my sister, my older sister, who lives in the Bronx, and her children go to school in the Bronx, she had no idea. She's like, what are you talking about? So everything I was getting, I was just forwarding over to her. And then she started speaking to parents in her school who had no idea that they had an option. She decided to go to her assistant principal to present saying the opt-out letter. And he told her basically, I don't know what you're talking about, and you need to show me documentation. And so she already knew she was up against the fight. Me and another parent from Brooklyn New School went up. She's actually in the Change of Stakes. We went up to the school and we spoke. And it was interesting to note that, that at the time the principal said, I heard him speaking to another parent there. And he said, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't have no idea what this is all about. But then as soon as the other parent spoke and she showed the video, it was like he got up and he stood and he said, he gave us a story about how even his third grader, his child, was crying 2 weeks before about the test. And then he went on to say to the parents there, he said, you have the choice. And it was such an eye-opener because it was like half hour before, he was like, no way.
He was in the Matrix and then he
Yeah.
was out of the Matrix. Like, I jumped out of the Matrix.
And then he was like, and
And he was free. He was free. Oh my God, it's crazy. I want to make
Incredible.
t-shirts. Somebody do it with me. It's not your kid. It's the test. Okay, let's do that. Your kid's crying. It's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine. It was
Yeah,
quite
and to
interesting.
speak to that point and to add to all of the comments about like the sanctions that we see for these tests, I don't know the exact percentage, maybe you could tell me, but the referral to AIS, Academic Intervention Service, has skyrocketed since these developmentally inappropriate assessments have been forced down the throats of the younger and younger children. So now we're busy diagnosing and labeling more children and giving more children IEPs so that they can have more time to sit in front of these tests that aren't measuring anything.
We've seen ACS referrals go through the roof for educational neglect because parents don't know that opting out is a possibility, so their kid just won't go to school. So then all of a sudden the school's like, well, you're purposely as a parent not sending your child to school, which counts
As an
under
accident.
educational neglect.
Yeah.
So that's becoming, I feel like on our end it's becoming more of an issue, but in East New York, there is no, which is where I work, there is no conversation of opting out. And these are the students that need it the most. And then when they do,
Yep.
for the ones who have not gone to school because that's the only way they know to opt out, then they're at risk of
Yeah,
dealing with
failure.
police violence,
Yeah.
their parents are at risk of ACS.
Yeah.
And for some of our families, like you need to get on a shelter line really early.
Yeah.
So you actually can't sit and take a test for
Yeah.
all of these hours because then you risk not having a place to sleep at night. So the parents have to choose between, do I have a roof over my head or does my kid take this test? And if my kid doesn't take this test, they're being told then your kid won't be promoted to the next grade. That's like one of the primary ways that they force folks to take it.
So I just want to say that we're working, I think, like, because we're all people who have full-time jobs, that is not this. I think we're all stretched really thin, but I think we're starting to, after this year, really kind of distill maybe a more of a focus point. And so I think there are a core group of people coming out of Change the Stakes that really want to do more grassroots organizing and outreach in underserved communities. And so when we have your contact info, like, we'll definitely, reach out and let you know and encourage you to join us. But it's going to happen from people talking to people and going back into their communities. And, part of it is it takes time to learn. There's so many different pieces that we did not talk about today. It's huge. So you have to figure it out in your own mind before you can go and get somebody, at least a little bit, and then you learn together. But I think that's moving forward because this year was 33,000 New York State children opted out. Hopefully the number will be higher, but there has to be a lot of work in order for that to continue happening. I think, do we want to have one? Because it's just, I'm respectful of your time. It's 12:23, so if you want to go ahead and ask for it.
So I had a quick, I have so many things running through my head.
It's a lot.
I want to put them low. So first comment, this such an interesting juxtaposition. There's this phrase that's coming to mind just constantly, and it's something that was coined by a woman. She's a Native Hawaiian mother, and she describes her experience giving birth, and she talks about entering into this very white Western hospital and institutionalized experience, which went against everything that she had hoped for in her birthing experience because she wanted something different. And she described the impression she got of the nurses, doctors with her as already failing. And I'm just thinking, oh, doesn't that ring so true for the children in these schools? And now, though, they're met with this, you have to be college career ready, but you're already failing. So it's just like, what a mixed message that is, and just hugely problematic. But then I'm not a parent either, but I'm a professor. I work with Lindsay at Hunter, and a lot of my research is nested within children's rights and participation. And as we know, children's rights within the United States are not necessarily acknowledged unless they relate to protection or provision, which we could say is not even where it should be. But when we talk about participation rights, I'm curious to know how, even in this conversation today, we're talking about making decisions on behalf of the child, for the sake of our children, not necessarily with our children. So then I'm curious to know in what ways are organizations talking with children to discuss the ramifications of these tests, and then also how can we use their voices and perspectives to probably try to create some change or do something to impact policy.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to hear from the people who have even younger children, because as a third grader, my child participated in the conversation, but for the K to younger, K to 1 or 2?
I mean, I think about how kids' voices in like growing up a lot as a teacher and as a parent, and I think that's one of the big things that's missing from in education, pretty much across the board, is like, what do children think about their lives? And I think that part of the reason we're having this conversation is because the people in power of our control of our education system, our country, like, they don't care to hear about the ideas of working class people in general, and they certainly don't care about the ideas of working class children. But I do think that there's a potential in education, I think, that needs to be amplified, that takes children's ideas more seriously, but we have a long way to go in order to amplify that. But I think that our movement could try to give some models of that. I mean, I've seen some really wonderful videos of parents talking about why they acted their children out. I would love to see that done, just of the children talking about why they and their parents decided to do that. My kindergartner, I mean, he has a lot to say about his experience in school, and you need to have patience to sort of cull through it because he's 5. But, and the 5-year-olds at the school where I work at have a lot to say about their own learning, but it takes a lot of patience that our society doesn't generally have for children. And I think, we could provide a different model in our movement if we, maybe do one of these videos that's just like asking the children what they think. And I think we would learn a lot if we listen closely.
And there are some young activists. I don't know if you are familiar with Ishan Johnson from Chicago. He's a 4th grader. He is fierce. He stopped his school. He stopped Rahm Emanuel from closing down his school. Yeah, basically. And he sees himself very much as part of the movement, and he's not. I think it's important to say that the act of refusing the test or opting out is one of many strategies that we have to employ. It happens to be one, I think, that is really effective right now, given where the pressure points are and what's being pushed on us, and that's why most of us have chosen that. But even having kids say, I'm not a data point, I'm not whatever, and I'm gonna have relationships, social networks, that's all there. I feel like it's beginning to build, and part of the thing is I didn't want to have some conversations with my daughter because I didn't want to freak her out unnecessarily. I didn't want to, because she's going to want to do, they're still in that kind of wanting to please the parent, and I didn't want to put that pressure on her. So we haven't had a ton of conversations, but she knows what we're going to rallies for, and she has thoughts and ideas. Like, one thing she said to me that really struck me is, she's like, when we do math at school, it's fine if you make a mistake. That's how you learn. And I was like, oh, that's so great, because she would not get that message if we were focused on test prep and doing worksheets where you have to get things right. She actually got, I think, a way more important lesson, which is, yeah, you get it wrong, or there's not just one right answer, there's ways of getting to the right answer. And sometimes it doesn't really even matter. And that's what I think was beautiful about that moment. And for me, that's the sort of conversation that many kids just don't get to have. And so, like, what are we doing? Because when we're saying, I think what the tests are saying is that there's the standard and you've got to hit it. And we want the best. We want for our kids to reach high and, accomplish a lot of stuff. But having, the standards that are being pushed are like equality in the sense that everybody gets the same thing, but it's not equity in the sense that everybody's not getting what they need. And I think for us, like, constantly getting to that point and saying you're never going to have children reach their potential if you're just throwing standards at them. Like, there's a lot more that has to be done, and I think it's a great point, one of the things about, listening to them and hearing what they have to say. And I think that's happening. I feel like there are, and there's Providence Student Union, there's one that's local to here, and these are a little bit older kids, but still, I think that it's happening.
I think there's a huge concern that comes up for me with, and I want children that I work with to be talking, to be heard. They're talking, they're just not being heard. And so for the past week, I've had to negotiate with an assistant principal why she shouldn't file criminal charges against 8-year-olds. And thankfully, I was successful, and the kid is not going through the system. And he had to deal with a whole bunch of other stuff. But so when I asked him, can you describe your assistant principal to me? I've never been to your school. Tell me what it's like. And it's a regular DOE school. And he said, my assistant principal is white and racist. And which is clear, right? Like, he is not confused at all about structural racism or his experiences. And if he said that in a meeting, that would take the meeting a totally different place. And there is a possibility that she then would have filed charges. Like, this little brown kid just called me racist. That is not acceptable. That's a possibility for her, right? So I think that there's, like, if our teachers are not talking about racism, and if our schools are not talking about breaking down institutional racism and classism and sexism, then when our kids are saying it, because they are saying it and because they are feeling it, then I think we're going to come to a head. Where then it would be good, because then we could really talk about, well, what's actually happening in the classroom, how are high-stakes tests actually, like, racist in classes, and what's happening on the exam, like the wording, and then what happens after the exam. But while I would love to have my kids be heard, because they have racial identities as early as 4, if not earlier, if we have white folks and elitists teaching, like white folks who are not dealing with what anti-racism looks like for them and in their practice, then having a kid that has that conversation is going to be really difficult and could be more damaging, right? It'll be good for the kid because it's about self-determination. So the kid's learning a lot. But it is going to be, I think, very traumatic in the classroom, and that's a huge concern I have when I want to make sure that kids are being heard. And I'm like, is this a safe situation for this kid? Are they going to end up more traumatic, like more traumatized at the end of this? And how do I make sure that they're being heard and still moving forward? Because I want them to be as self-determined as possible for the long run, because it's not the only teacher that they're going to deal with or assistant principal that they're going to deal with. But how do we have the conversation on both ends, right? Like, where teachers and principals and administration are having it so that they can actually hear the kids when they may not be using the word racism, but that's what they're experiencing and that's what they're trying to communicate that's happening in school, in class.
You mentioned about sort of including your child in the conversation, and so we had this kind of evolution in thinking about opting out, because I felt like I really did want it to make it this kind of shared decision with my kid. I'm like, he goes to a school, everything is like, what do you think? What's your idea? Whatever. And then I felt like, I don't want to say I'm opting you out. But the administration actually was very strong, saying, you know what, you make a lot of decisions for your kid, for their safety, for their, you decided to put him in this school, right? So you can make this decision. And at 8 years old, to give him the choice, maybe he doesn't understand or probably doesn't understand the full implications. So I kind of sat with that a little bit, and then I ended up saying, you know what, you're right, like I'm opting you out no matter what. But, I didn't present it to him like that. But so interestingly, he kept saying, I'm taking the test. Now, mind you, he started out in a class where like apparently nobody was opting out until the end. Only, I think, 6 kids in his class out of 32. Took 32 kids in his class. So we haven't talked about money and funding and what the issues are really about. Poverty and not being college career ready is like really about inequitable funding and lack of funding. So so he was fine, like, okay, well, I really want to take the test. And I said, well, no. So we kept talking, and I said, you're not going to take the test, and here are reasons. So every time we kept talking throughout the year, I would bring up a different point, and we ended up talking about structural racism, and we started talking, it's not fair for children who don't speak English, and that, so do you want to be a part of something that's not fair for all kids, even if you would do well? So it's like really, and I don't think that he has like an adult understanding of all of that, but the conversation was begun. And then going to school on a day where, well, some children did choose to take it. Their parents made different choices, and that's okay. But this is what we understand. Just having, it's an ongoing conversation that we have to keep having, and trying to connect it to larger human rights and children's rights, I think is really important. And I think we'll be able to build on that as he gets older. For a 5-year-old, that's difficult. And to your point, I think we just really need to think about all the stakeholders, so kids can't talk to their principals about being racist if parents aren't having those conversations at home and feeling empowered and connected. It's not fair to have a kid sit there and do that work on their own. They need to be doing it in the safety of a community that can support them to express and hear them and to express what's going on. And so I think there's a lot that needs to happen on all levels. So I just want to thank you all for staying well past the panel, and encourage you to take any literature and make sure your contact info is there, and we'll send out any links or information that you want to reach out to us and ask, and get involved, agitate. Thank you.